Okay, here goes nothing once again. A few items of housekeeping. I did try to fix the settings on this camera. It's an AK 50 and it wants to start a new video every 10 minutes and I couldn't fix it. So this video and all my videos will be 10 minutes. Sorry about that. I don't know if I'll be in the middle of a sentence or a word when it gets cut off and starts the new video, but such is life in the fast lane and in Guatemala. Someone asked me about this note that Bernadette wrote me at the beginning of this autobiography. James, sorry about this mistake. It will be fixed. Love ya, Bernadette. And the mistake is that this page is basically identical to this page, the page before. I got the first editions of all of her books. I think at one point I had 4 editions of her final masterpiece, The Real Christ. And I was able to help her not edit, but proofread a little bit. Things were in boldface, which shouldn't have been in boldface, stuff like that. So that was the mistake. And then the smart person also informed me that in Hinduism, Atman does not necessarily imply a self. And I realized that true self is probably a very poor translation of the term Atman. And if Hindus don't mean true self ever at all by that word, then they would have a lot more in common with Bernadette than we think. So when we last left off, she was 8. I think we're just going to go probably through age 14 today because there's quite a lot of really interesting, beautiful material here that I want to show with you. Won't get to 15 like I thought. When she was 8, she started feeling pain in her hip. Turns out she was developing a bone disease. She started limping, and people thought she was faking it to try to get attention or something. And the sisters at their Catholic school said this. They said, walking in line, I couldn't keep up, that I was painfully slow going up the 2 flights of stairs to my 4th grade classroom, that I often looked tired, pale, and so on. I have to admit the 2 or 3 mile walk to school and back was difficult. Sometimes I felt so weak and breathless I had to stop many times along the way, which meant leaving home an hour early to get to school on time. Sometimes I sat down and cried. The pain was so exhausting. It was now 7 or 8 months since I first became aware of the limp. What had started out as a dull pain in my side was now producing such excruciating stabs of pain. My whole body was momentarily immobilized. So in the end, she basically gets kicked out of school for this limping. I'm sure my parents passed on what the doctor had told him, that he hadn't found anything. He was not a specialist. Which meant they too regarded me as a lying fake. In their minds, I must have been a mental case that didn't belong in their school, which is probably why, after a month or so, my parents told me the sisters didn't want me at school as long as I limped. Here's a conversation she had with her dad about the whole thing. Dad, if the doctor can't find anything the matter, what else are we to think? If he said I was faking, then he's a liar. He's just saying that because he's a rotten doctor and doesn't know a thing. So you really feel pain? Yes, why don't you believe me? Because nobody can find a cause for it. You mean the doctor can't. He ought to know he's considered the best. Well, he's not. Besides, since I'm the one who feels the pain, why should it bother you? I've never complained, never asked for your help. We don't like seeing you limping around, that's all. Why does it bother you? You look pathetic. Everyone asks what's the matter. It's an attention getter. The doctor says there's no reason for you to be limping anyway, so you really don't have to. Dad was angry now. But how can I help it? You can if you want to. You might start to practice walking without a limp. But what if I can't? Dad angrily. Well, until you can, I don't want you around me. I don't want to see you again until you have stopped limping. Do you understand? Before he stomped out, he told me I was to go back to school as usual. How that came about, I never knew and was not about to ask. After he left, I burst into tears. So poor girl, everyone thinks she's faking it. She gets severely depressed, and she sees this cloud over her head, this dark, foreboding, ominous, dark gray cloud. The next time, the cloud was about a foot over my head, dark and heavy as if it were ready to burst and inundate me completely. The only reason this sight didn't freeze me with fear is that each time I saw the cloud, my eyes immediately turned to my interior friend, that steady light within. I was sure its power alone was holding the cloud in abeyance and would never permit it to engulf me. Though the interior power was awesome and mysterious in its own right, I had good reason to trust it with my life. So the cloud's being held in abeyance by this interior power. This was an awesome, totally independent power. There was no second guessing what it might do. All in all, it was just not something you pray to. Besides, it had some work to do in me and would do it, come what may. Thus, no appeal would alter this in any way. Despite this, however, I figured I could at least pose a question to it. I decided on the simple question, what'll I do now? So she turns within, asks the question. I watched incredulously as it gradually became smaller and dimmer, a mere pinpoint of light. Then abruptly it disappeared. I could not believe my eyes. To test my sight, I deliberately lifted my head and looked around the room. I could see perfectly, so I closed them again and looked within. This time, however, what I saw was the most horrifying sight of my life. Where the light had been, there was a huge black bottomless hole. I say huge because it seemed to take up all the space within me, not merely the discrete space the light had always occupied. On seeing this, there arose from that black space a pain such as I had never experienced before. Not a physical or emotional pain, but a pain of another dimension entirely. So now she's going through experiencing the withdrawal, the pain of the withdrawal of this power, this presence. This pain may have lasted 15 minutes or several hours, I don't know. The next thing I knew, I was lying flat on the floor, my head toward the window, feet toward the bed, feeling so physically frozen that the slightest movement caused excruciating pain. It was as if every bone and joint had been frozen stiff. All I knew is that I had to get warm, get to bed. Since it was impossible to get up, I painfully rolled over onto my stomach, squirmed my body around to face the bed, and slowly dragged my way towards it. Getting hold of the sideboard, I finally managed to pull myself into bed. Altogether, this took maybe an hour. Next morning, her mom comes in and is rather shocked. Although I could see her and hear her asking me what was the matter or how I felt, I could not respond. My mind could not generate a single word or thought. I could only stare at her. Later she returned and spooned some chicken broth into my mouth, and later other stuff as well. Apart from this, I just lay there. Whether my eyes were open or closed made no difference. I didn't sleep a wink. Later Mom told me, "You lay there for 2 whole days because nobody could budge you." That's when I made a doctor's appointment over your dad's protests. So she's lying there in bed, unable to move, unable to think, and then this happens. She sees a light flickering on the wall above her about 4 or 5 feet from her head. All of a sudden I felt a physical crack, click, or snap in my brain, at which moment I recognized what I was looking at. It was a picture of the waves breaking on the shore. As I continued to watch, the picture seemed to imprint a message on my mind: get to the sea. I understood somehow I had to get to the sea. Next morning, she wakes up and she knows instantly what she has to do. It must have taken an hour to get dressed in my school uniform. She slowly makes her way downstairs, and like a zombie, she starts walking out the door. And her mom says, "Hey, wait! You can't go to school."